people think that goes away in April with the heat.
Hi, welcome to Planet America. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chaz Ciudalo.
Tonight, Donald Trump's assault on the truth. We'll look at the worst distortions and flat-out lies with the Washington Post's fact-checker.
The feds are stepping up their law and order crusade, whether the states want them to or not.
And Joe Biden says he'll name his VP next week.
All of that and the latest 2020 polls, but first...
The clock is ticking for millions of Americans who are about to lose their jobless benefits unless Congress can agree on a deal to extend the aid as a part of a further federal relief package. Republicans belatedly unveiled a plan yesterday worth about $1 trillion. It would replace the current $600 a week payment with $200 until states can introduce one calculated at 70% of previous earnings. Top-ranked House Democrat Nancy Pelosi says the Republican plan is inadequate, while Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin is standing firm.
It just wouldn't be fair to use taxpayer dollars to pay more people to sit home than they would get working and get a job.
They're resenting $600 for single moms to be able to put food on the table.
Look, I get why Mnuchin thinks paying unemployed people more than their wages might discourage them from going back to work. But it's a bit early for those kinds of concerns, I think. There aren't nearly enough jobs out there for everyone at the moment. There are a number of states that people shouldn't be going back to work in at all. And also, around 70% of the people who went back to work last month were making more on unemployment benefits than their previous wage. Most people just want to work. Also, those extra unemployment benefits, they've actually already run out because the payments only occur for weeks where the weekend falls inside the covered month. So Congress better get moving. The employment rate might have looked pretty good last month, but this is what's happened this month. The next lot of official unemployment figures could well be nasty. And look just how big a gap the congressional boffins have projected there'll be this year between what national output is and what it should be. It's an even bigger gap than the GFC had, even after all of this year's stimulus. America needs that bill passed bad. But on to the COVID numbers. The daily cases are still hovering around the 70,000 case mark. The daily deaths are still slowly rising, with total deaths nudging 150,000, and national hospitalizations are still at the same level they were at their April peak. Although, there is something quite misleading about those numbers, because these days, all 50 states publicly report their hospitalisation figures. But back in April, only 37 states reported their hospital numbers. So the hospital situation today is probably less concerning than it was back then. A more useful hospitalisation figure might be this. States with more than 20% of their hospital beds filled with COVID patients. Generally speaking, anything above 10% is considered a worry. So Texas and New Mexico, both on 30%, and Arizona over 40%, their hospitals seem to be under some real pressure.
Well, Chaz, the next crucial stage of the clinical trial of a coronavirus vaccine developed by the Massachusetts-based biotech firm Moderna began yesterday. Up to 30,000 adult volunteers are going to take part. America's top infectious diseases expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci, says the earlier phases of this trial process were encouraging, but now it really is crunch time.
This is phase 3 right now, which will take several months to determine if, in fact, it does work. So to go from not even knowing what the virus was in early January to a phase 3 trial is really record time. And I might add, it was not done compromising safety, nor was it done compromising scientific integrity.
Meanwhile, President Trump is still not giving up on the hope that the anti-malarial drug hydroxychloroquine could be a silver bullet in the treatment of COVID-19. Despite the National Institute of Health and the World Health Organization both calling off trials because they found it was very unlikely to be beneficial. Yesterday, the president sent 10 tweets supporting the drug, including this clip of a Texas doctor named Stella Emanuel, claiming it is both a cure and a preventative that is being covered up.
For the past few months, I've taken care of over 350 patients. We've not lost one. Not a diabetic, not somebody with high blood pressure, not somebody with asthma, not an old person. We've not lost one patient. And on top of that, I've put myself, my staff, and many doctors that I know on hydroxychloroquine for prevention, because by the very mechanism of action, it works early and as a prophylaxis.
Dr. Emanuel was on Capitol Hill yesterday with a group calling themselves America's Frontline Doctors, and she has got a lot of faith in hydroxychloroquine. She also has a lot of faith in miracles, literally, and in witchcraft and in evil spirits. She is a Christian minister as well as a physician who also believes homosexuals are terrorists and a gay agenda is being pushed by the Illuminati.
They terrorize you by calling you, they terrorize your business. It's just become a terror. They just terrorize everybody. Right now, there's a homosexual terrorism in America. You can't say anything. You can't say, I don't believe in gay marriage. Everybody will go against you.
And Twitter blocked that first clip of Dr. Emanuel, Chaz, because they said that it had breached their rules, so they deleted the Trump tweet.
Yeah, that video was pretty far out there.
It was.
Well, not quite that far out there, but still very far out there. I don't want to get into round 20 of the hydroxychloroquine debate, John. We know some doctors swear by it, and also some people who believe in witches swear by it. And there have been some positive studies, like a trial last month that found death rates were 50% lower amongst those treated with hydroxychloroquine. But that wasn't actually a randomised trial, which means it could well have been biased, especially given the patients who received hydroxychloroquine were also more likely to receive steroids that we know for a fact help COVID patients. So not much of a trial, really. And in fact, there have been at least 3 randomised trials that showed no benefit from hydroxychloroquine and 0 randomised trials that showed it working. So until that changes, let's move on.
Let's do exactly that, Chaz, because the Trump administration has got plans to send more federal agents to Portland, Oregon and other US cities on the pretext of defending federal buildings like the local courthouse from vandalism by Black Lives Matter protesters who are angry at police brutality. Federal marshals, customs and border protection officers and drug enforcement agency personnel are among the camouflage-clad forces sent to bolster local police, against the wishes of local government leaders. Democrat Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer says that federal troops have no authority to be making arrests beyond federal land, and he says the whole operation is a political diversion.
It's so typical of Trump. He can't solve the COVID crisis. Testing is a mess. The whole country realizes he's an abject failure, so he tries to do a diversionary thing. But this one is a despicable diversionary thing, and it will backfire on him.
This week, an Oregon judge issued a restraining order preventing federal police arresting legitimate onlookers, including journalists. The protests, though, were already descending into full-scale riots.
Crowds turning violent at the federal courthouse this week. Many protesters claiming they've been arrested by law enforcement in unmarked vehicles. The Homeland Security Department insisting the agents are acting appropriately, saying their mission is to protect federal property.
President Trump has warned protesters they face a decade in jail for damaging federal property.
Anarchists, agitators, and protesters who vandalize or damage our federal courthouse in Portland or any federal building in any of our cities or states will be prosecuted under a recently reenacted Statues and Monuments Act. Minimum 10 years in prison. Don't do it.
And on the weekend, a protest in Austin, Texas turned deadly. 28-year-old protester Garrett Foster was shot and killed by a motorist. Foster was himself carrying an AK-47, which is legal in open carry, Texas. Some witnesses claimed that he pointed his gun at the driver who then fired at him. Others said he did not. He was pushing his fiance's wheelchair moments before the killing. Either way, if this federal intervention was intended to quell protests, it has not succeeded.
Chaos in America, violent clashes erupting across the country.
If, however, generating news coverage like that for Trump's political benefit was the intended outcome, Chaz, then mission accomplished.
Yeah, look, to be fair, some of this operation is actually working quite well. In Chicago, for instance, the feds are working in partnership with the city police, and they're not doing their own thing. The federal agents are plugging into existing operations, so that's useful. They've already charged 3 people with illegal gun and ammunition possession. Good. The problem comes when the feds start behaving like an alternative militaristic police force, especially when it's against the will of the local government. Like this incident that we showed you on Friday's show, where these guys in camo gear arrested someone without a word, led them into an unmarked van and drove them off somewhere. Now, this was how the Department of Homeland Security described it.
The individual that they were questioning was in a crowd and in an area where an individual was aiming a laser at the eyes of officers. But as they approached him, they noticed that coming in their direction were violent demonstrators that now see what's going on and they want to go help. So they asked the individual, please get in the van, and they did take them to an area that was safe for both the officers and the individual to do the questioning. And then they conducted the questioning and they released the individual because they did not have what they needed.
Okay, so by their own admission, they arrested someone who wasn't even a suspect, just maybe a witness. Despite what he said, we saw in the video, they didn't say anything to him, but they dragged him off to some other place and then they let him go when it became obvious they had nothing on him. That's all doing the police's job, but doing it very badly and probably illegally. It also contradicts, by the way, the current Republican policy platform, which condemns the federal government expanding into areas beyond those specifically enumerated by the Constitution. I don't know, like maybe law enforcement. So why is this a problem? Because if the feds think they can just do anything, they start getting sloppy.
This Vietnam veteran, combat medic, who took injured...
And you get peaceful people being pepper sprayed in the face. The activists who are looking for a fight start seeing these feds as a new target, so they start throwing fireworks at them and generally treating them like an occupying force. The feds get jumpy and start arresting people for anything. Like, say, dancing with flowers. Just look how this one dumb arresting decision escalates. Things escalate further and the activists start turning up with high-powered lasers, which they point at the feds. That might sound like a prank, but it's not, because at least 3 federal officers may be permanently blinded after activists shone lasers in their eyes. And it just keeps on escalating. So you've got the feds acting like an army whose base is the federal courthouse, and the activists becoming obsessed with destroying that courthouse. So every night it's like a cross between some sick sporting contest and a war zone. I mean, look at this. They've got shields, for God's sake. So this is going nowhere good, which is why you'd hope that the guys who are running this war game were at least judiciously chosen. Not quite. To the wall!
Big, beautiful wall.
Now, the Department of Homeland Security last had an official, Senate-confirmed, constitutionally leader in April 2019. Back then, Trump felt that Kirstjen Nielsen wasn't doing enough about illegal immigration and people smuggling, and fair enough, she was so soft, she even let them smuggle a J into her first name. But regardless, she resigned. And then Trump replaced her with no one! Since April last year, there have been a couple of acting secretaries, but no one Senate confirmed. And that's a problem, because according to the law, unless a nomination occurs, the acting secretary can only legally serve in office for 210 days. So you gotta watch out for, well, hang on. Come over here for a second. There's something funny going on. Homeland Security has been run by an acting secretary for more than 469 days, and Trump's never nominated a replacement. That's a lot more than the 210-day limit, and that's why a law professor who's an expert on federal vacancies says that that acting guy, his continued service is unconstitutional. So does anyone know why he's still there? I don't know either. Okay. As dubious as all that is, at least there's a deputy secretary who's actually, oh, she's gone too. Elaine Duke resigned in April 2018. That position has also had some acting officials, but now they can't even get away with that, so they've got some senior official performing the duties of the deputy secretary. But wait, below Mr. Senior Official there are 4 undersecretaries. Yeah, there's the Undersecretary for Intelligence and Analysis, who's been vacant since May this year. Then there's the Undersecretary for Management. That's been vacant since April last year. They've got one of those senior official performing the duties of dudes as well. There's the Undersecretary for Science and Technology. That's gone one better. It's never had a confirmed office holder under Trump. They've just had one of those senior official performing the duty doohickeys the entire time. Then they've got the Undersecretary for Strategy and Policy, and he actually was confirmed by the Senate. Chad Wolf, yay! But the very day he was confirmed, they then moved him into the acting secretary's position that he wasn't confirmed for, and they've replaced him with another of those senior official performing the duty of etc, etc, etc. So not an awful lot of Democratic accountability there. But it's not just these positions that have some say in DHS's activities in Portland. Many of the federal officers are coming from Customs and Border Protection, who currently only have an acting commissioner as well. Some officers may also come from USCIS, who got rid of their director a year ago and replaced him with nobody. And some officers also come from ICE, who have never had a Senate-confirmed director under Trump. Just a senior official performing whatever, who cares, you know the drill. So there are 9 positions that could be potentially involved in the Portland operations, and not one of them has been Senate-confirmed for that position. I haven't seen so much unwelcome acting since, well, this. Bravo. And remember, Republicans hold the Senate. These people just need the votes of 51 out of 53 Republican senators to get confirmed. Easy. But the administration couldn't even be bothered asking for that. That is not a lot of respect for the law. And you know, there's only one thing that creates respect for the law, apparently. Bring on the tear gas. It's the smell of law and order.
Big, beautiful words.
It was quite the landmark. This month, President Trump passed 20,000 false and misleading public claims, that according to the Washington Post fact-checkers tally. And Trump has said some howlers literally hundreds of times.
America now has the best economy in the history of our country, and we want to keep it that way.
Well, the fact-checkers found that while the US economy was doing pretty well before the coronavirus pandemic hit, it was not doing as well as it did under Presidents Eisenhower, Johnson or Clinton. But still, President Trump keeps on making that claim 360 times and counting. The editor-in-chief writer of the Post fact-checker is Glenn Kessler. He and the team have produced a new book called Donald Trump and His Assault on the Truth, and he's with us now. Glenn, welcome to Planet America.
Thank you very much.
You write early on in your book that all presidents lie. So what makes Donald Trump different?
The big difference is that he lies on just about every subject and every single day. I mean, we've been tracking his rate of false or misleading claims. Now, not all of those are lies, of course, but false or misleading claims, and it adds up to about 23 claims a day in the past year.
Now, Trump obviously is a salesman, so a certain number of those false claims would be the greatest X ever or the worst Y ever. So what's your policy for dealing with those kinds of serial exaggerations that most people know are just puffery?
Well, we deal with it as we deal with all sorts of claims as fact checkers. I mean, it's an exaggeration, and we will, depending on the size of it, we will call it out. You don't necessarily know that people realize these are exaggerations. For instance, he has now said more than 200 times that he passed the largest tax cut in U.S. history. And actually, his tax cut only ranks 8th out of the last 100 years. Now, that's a pretty big exaggeration. And other things that are strange about Trump is he exaggerates even when he doesn't have to. He'll routinely pretend to have created more jobs than he did, even though before the coronavirus, he actually had a pretty good record on jobs.
Glenn, on the question of Trump's exaggeration, it was famously said of Trump that journalists took him literally but not seriously, whereas voters took him seriously but not literally. Is it a problem if we have an American president who cannot be taken literally?
Well, yeah. I mean, I never was a big fan of that statement. I thought I kind of missed a point there. And I think actually what you see in the polling is that Donald Trump has a very low rating in terms of how people rate him on trustworthiness. And it's something that really drags down his overall rating as president. So, he was elected president for a variety of reasons, quite narrowly, and he's never been able to achieve 50% approval rate in his entire time as president. And that has not happened to any president since World War II.
And what do you think, Glenn, of some of the attempts to fact-check Donald Trump to his face? Chris Wallace did it a week or two ago on Fox News Sunday. Do you think more journalists should be trying to do that, maybe even in the upcoming debates?
I've never been a fan of the idea of fact-checking in the middle of the debate, like the moderator would do that, because I think, the viewers are there to hear the candidates debate. They don't want to see the journalists get in the middle of it. But I do think American journalists have failed to hold the president to account for the things he's saying at the moment he's saying them. And that was one of the, the noteworthy things that Chris Wallace did. He called him out in the middle of the interview and forced Trump to either realize he didn't say what he was saying was not right, or to make the president look like he didn't know what he was talking about.
As a fact checker, do you think it's possible to fact check Facebook and Twitter effectively? And how do you think social media companies should deal with these kinds of issues?
Well, that's an excellent question. There is a consortium of fact checkers that go through the various claims that appear on Facebook and downgrade them if they are found to be false. But it's like an ocean. It's hard to wade through all that stuff. And what I always say is that in order for it to really work in social media, everyone has to be their own fact checker and be careful about the links that they share or the things that they suddenly believe, because just because it appears on your screen doesn't mean it's true.
And finally, Glenn, do you think that Donald Trump has changed the rules, or is he a one-off who can get away with a lack of truthfulness in public office?
Well, I think the answer to that question would depend on the results of the election. If he is reelected, despite having said more than 20,000 things that are false or misleading and saying all sorts of things that are completely inaccurate, then I think other politicians might say to themselves, well, look, there's no real consequence, and he got elected, so maybe this works. If he's defeated, then people in the political business will change their calculation and will say, actually, this didn't work. In the end, it backfired on him.
Glenn Kessler, great to talk to you. Thanks for being with us on Planet America.
You're welcome.
With 97 days to go until Election Day, former US Vice President Joe Biden continues to build on his lead in national and swing state polls. Biden's average lead nationally is now over 9 points, and he's topping 50%, which is a rare feat in recent elections. But it is the battleground numbers that'll be sending the real shivers through the Trump campaign this week. Biden is leading by over 8 points in Michigan, almost 8 points in Florida, over 7 points in Pennsylvania, 6 points in Wisconsin, and Biden is also leading in Arizona by 4, Ohio by 1.5 points. Those are all states that Trump won in 2016. Most alarmingly of all, Texas is a virtual tie, a state Trump won by 9 points and has only backed one Democrat in 50 years. If Joe Biden wins Texas, this election would be the biggest walkover since 1984 and Ronald Reagan, Chaz.
Yeah, look, he's certainly in a good position, no doubt about that. At this point in 2016, Hillary was at the absolute peak, and she had a 44-38 lead for like a week. That's 6 points. Biden has had a 9-point lead for about 6 weeks now. And as you say, he's over 50%, and that means Trump has to actively change the minds of people who have been watching him for 3 years and have decided he doesn't deserve re-election. That's a tough ask. But on the other hand, 97 days is about 10 years in Trump time, so a lot can happen yet.
Yeah, and one of the big things that's going to happen in the next week or so is Joe Biden is going to name his vice presidential running mate. He's already said that it will be a woman, and he has confirmed that 4 women of colour are among those on the shortest of short lists. Former rivals Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris are reportedly among those being vetted quite deeply, but this week another name was added to that list, Susan Rice, the former UN ambassador and national security advisor under Barack Obama. Rice is seen by some as the most qualified, particularly on foreign affairs, effectively to become Joe Biden's Joe Biden, if you will. If Rice were to be nominated, it'd be the first time since Sergeant Shriver in 1972 that somebody who has never held elected office was picked as a presidential candidate's running mate. An announcement has to be made before the Democratic Convention. That's coming up on the 17th of August, but earlier today, Joe Biden told reporters he would be making his announcement next week.
Okay, well look, I'm not into speculation, but I will say this. Back in 2016, Tim Kaine's Wikipedia page had a heap of edits in the weeks before he was announced. In 2008, Sarah Palin's Wikipedia page had a heap of edits beforehand as well, before she was announced. In May, Stacey Abrams' page had 66 edits, Elizabeth Warren's page had 22 edits, Klobuchar's had 4, and Kamala Harris's page had 408. Soon after that, Harris's page was placed under editing restrictions because it had hit 500 edits in short time. So I know where my money is.
Yes, and Wikipedia is never wrong. Now, it's time to hit the road again to one of those battleground states that could well decide this year's presidential election. And this week, we're heading south of the old Mason-Dixon line to North Carolina. North Carolina, the Tar Heel state, so named, the story goes, because after it became the 10th state to secede from the Union at the start of the Civil War, North Carolina's soldiers would not take a backward step. It was like they had tar on their heels. In fact, North Carolina sent more troops to fight to maintain slavery than any other state. 130,000 enlisted, 40,000 of them died, while around 10,000 white Northern Carolinians and 5,000 freed slaves fought to defend the Union. A century after the Confederate defeat, the state's economy still depended heavily on cotton and tobacco and some rather musical auctioneers.
At 45, 45, 7, 8, 9, 50 $1 in the morning, 3 and a 4 and a 5, 55, 7, 8, 9, $1 in the morning.
Its forests were felled to produce timber, and North Carolina became the furniture-making capital of the world. But in other ways, little had changed.
In early autumn, the tuber-laden vines are taken from the ground and stacked to dry.
And they still grow most of America's sweet potatoes. These days, the state also makes car parts, pharmaceuticals, and it's a major finance and banking centre. In 1903, Kitty Hawk, North Carolina was the scene of the Wright brothers' pioneering powered flight.
Now, Orville will be coming along in just a moment. Hurry up, Orville. There he goes.
10 years earlier, a drugstore worker named Caleb Branham invented a tonic for dyspepsia, so they called it Pepsi.
Those who think young say Pepsi, please. They pick the right one, the modern light one. Now it's Pepsi.
North Carolina's calorific contribution to the world also includes Krispy Kreme donuts, and they are packing on the pounds. The state's adult obesity rate is now 33%, up from just 12% 30 years ago. Charlotte is the biggest city, Raleigh is the capital. The population of 10.5 million is over 60% white, 20% black and around 10% Hispanic or Latino. North Carolina also produced jazz greats like John Coltrane, Thelonious Monk and Nina Simone.
I ain't got no country, ain't got no schooling, ain't got no friends, ain't got no nothing.
In the middle of the 20th century, North Carolina still was not a great place to be black. Poll taxes stopped many African Americans voting until the mid-1960s. Schools weren't formally desegregated until the early 70s. In reality, many remain racially divided today because of informal housing segregation in neighbourhoods. Politically, North Carolina has elected 3 Republican governors in the last 50 years and 5 Democrats, including the incumbent, Roy Cooper, who's up for re-election this November. Nationally, though, North Carolina is more conservative, voting for a Republican president 10 times since 1970 and a Democrat just twice, Southerner Jimmy Carter in 1976 and Barack Obama in 2008.
We are going to win the great state of North Carolina.
Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton here in 2016 by around 3.5 points, putting it into the battleground category this year, and it has been a close race. Last October, Biden led Trump by around 7.5 points. 6 months later, Trump was marginally in front. Now, Biden is leading again by just about 2 points. North Carolina has experienced over 100,000 COVID-19 cases and more than 1,700 deaths. It shut down earlier than most southern states and has been slower to reopen. Bars, gyms and cinemas are still closed. With some easing, the jobless rate came down from 12.8% in May to 7.6% in June. Not great, but better than some. That has come at a cost though. More than 13,000 new COVID cases last week alone. Governor Cooper initially got high marks for his COVID response, hitting 61% approval in April. That's now come down to the mid-40s and could prove to be a drag on his fellow Democrat Joe Biden when they share the ballot this November. The Tar Heel states' 15 electoral college votes are certainly up for grabs.
Out of context, Biden's chat with Barack Obama. Biden explains what happens when he reveals his age.
People go, oh.
And when he tells them he's not kidding.
Now you have people going, oh my Lord.
Biden reveals what his doctor said to convince him to stay in the basement.
Suffer the last 5 months of your life in peace.
And he tells us what he'll do in his first 100 days in office.
Bingo.
That was Biden and Obama's chat, out of context.
You're on your own.
And that's your lot for another trip to Planet America. We'll see you for a fireside chat on ABC News on Friday night.
And we'll be back here next Wednesday, and you can find both shows on iView, Facebook and YouTube whenever you like.
Good night.